Excellent. Our next speaker is Nate Reitz. He is the Executive Director of the Minnesota Sentencing Guidelines Commission, served in that position since 2014. And he has past lives as a prosecutor, as well as doing defense work and more prosecution in the United States Army. He does have a tie to Kansas. He was at Fort Riley and did a stint there. But I'm very happy to have him today talk a little bit about their process. A couple of years ago, if you recall, we had Pennsylvania. Those of you that were on the commission had Pennsylvania talk to us about their process of comprehensively revamping their entire guidelines system. It was a scary time when Mark Bergson told us it was 10 years that it took them to actually do this in the process. Minnesota has drastically streamlined their process. And because of that, I wanted Nate to come and talk about it. Nate is serves on the executive committee of the National Association of Sentencing Commissions and has been a friend of a lot of the sentencing commissions throughout the country for quite some time. And we're happy to have him here to talk about his experience with the process that Minnesota has gone through. Most of you know that the Minnesota guidelines were promulgated prior to Kansas's, and so they sought to undertake this process. And I will turn it over to Nate to give us a little bit better perspective of what to consider and what not to do. So, Nate.
Thank you, Scott. Just a couple of corrections. One is, additions. One is, I'm no longer on the executive committee of the National Association of Sentencing Commissions. I did my time, and my release date was last August. So, the second thing is I'll be joined by my research supervisor, Leah Bauer. So she'll jump in when we start talking about research questions. On the topic of jumping in, feel free to jump in at any time if you have any questions. I don't have a real formal outline for this process. I just had a conversation with Scott recently, and he asked me, "Hey, why don't you talk to the commission next week?" And I said absolutely. So I don't have any slides to present. So if we want to unshare just to give everybody a little more screen space, that would be great. Or leave it on, that's fine. It's just
we're on it.
Okay. So the Minnesota Sentencing Guidelines Commission was created in effective, I think it was April 1st, 1978, making it the first, boy, that is far out, man. So speaking of 1978, it was the first Sentencing Guidelines Commission in the nation. And what was really remarkable about it had the daunting task of creating the first sentencing guidelines in the nation by January 1st of 1980. So really a year and a half approximately by the time they got their feet under them to create the first sentencing guidelines out of nothing. And they did that. I don't know if they did it by January 1st or not, but the report is dated January, and the date is left to the imagination. But they did create the sentencing guidelines, and really those sentencing guidelines, that basic structure is the same as it is now. There were some changes to cosmetic changes that have been made from time to time, but essentially the structure is the same. There have been a lot of additions and modifications and special rules, and the guidelines have ballooned in length. But the point here is the guidelines were never comprehensively reviewed during all those decades that followed. Now, there were, to be sure, large projects from time to time. During my tenure, for example, a previous chair wanted to look at the criminal history score, so the horizontal axis of our two-axis grid. And so we did that. We spent several years on that project. But as far as just comprehensively looking at the guidelines from top to bottom, that was never done. Thank you. I have a little more room to see on
All
this
right.
one. Um,
Busy.
Fast forward then to 2022, during the National Association of Sentencing Commissions annual conference that year, we were hearing from Pennsylvania and Washington, who had recently undertaken their own comprehensive reviews of the sentencing guidelines. And I was sitting next to my boss, Chair Kelly Lynn Mitchell, who is still the chair of the Sentencing Guidelines Commission. And as I recall, she elbowed me and said, "We need to do that." So I got on it. That happened to be fortuitously. So we budget in a 2-year budget cycle, and it was just approaching the fall before the spring session where they determine how the money would be spent for the next 2-year cycle. So I quickly put together some budget requests. Now, I assume Kansas is similar to Minnesota in that sometimes there are years of famine and sometimes there are years of plenty. And 2023 was shaping up to be a year of plenty. So it looked like a good time to request specifically one-time asks for budget funds, and we did that. There were other things we requested, but the leading one was this request for funds for the comprehensive review. And we basically spent those funds, or we requested those funds in 3 different pie slices. The largest slice of the pie was for an entity that we have here in Minnesota state government that falls under another entity called Minnesota Management and Budget, which is essentially the holders of the money, and also essentially the treasurer for the state of Minnesota. But they have a subordinate agency called Management Analysis and Development, and they are, if you will, in-house consultants that agencies can use if they have the funds to do so. So let me freeze a little bit and describe what my agency looked like at that time. So we had, well, we have a research staff, which is the majority of our agency, and we also have additional staff, including myself. But so at that time we had 4 full-time research staff and 2 other FTEs, including myself. So we had 6 FTEs, and the research didn't have any special expertise in doing surveys or focus groups or that sort of thing, and getting stakeholder input. And from hearing from Pennsylvania and Washington, it seemed pretty clear that stakeholder input was very important, really key. And it seemed to me that if I was understanding Pennsylvania's experience correctly, part of their problem was that they were doing stakeholder, and I don't want to speak for Pennsylvania, but this is my impression, that they seem to be doing stakeholder engagement in a linear fashion rather than doing multiple, reaching out to multiple stakeholder groups at once. They were reaching out to them one at a time, and it was taking up a lot of time. So we were trying to fund basically this professional group, Management Analysis and Development, or MAD, to do our stakeholder engagement for us, so they could go out and that the risk there is they didn't necessarily understand the sentencing guidelines as well as staff did. But the benefit is they did understand stakeholder engagement. Another thing that MAD could do for us was meeting facilitation. So it looks like you're having a workshop today. I don't know if that's normal for you, but we did have a couple of workshops in the course of this, and we got MAD to help facilitate those workshops to see if we could come to consensus and that sort of thing at key moments of decision during this process. So that was the largest budget item. The second largest budget item, well, I'll skip to the third largest budget item, which was probably underfunded in our request in hindsight. really, I tried to get data on how much we would need for this, but this was to get academic support, sort of to get more of the, uh, what does the literature say, and what are some um, deeper dive sociological research questions that can be answered, and so forth, to augment our staff, which was fully employed. And I should add that as part of the budget request that I made in 2023, I made it in 2022, but it went to the 2023 legislature and was endorsed by the governor, I should add, was to add a research supervisor. We didn't have a research supervisor. I'm not really trained at all. My background is in law, as Scott told you, so I didn't really have a research background. So we lacked a research supervisor. Now we have Leah, who joined us as a result of a lot of the changes that happened in 2023. In addition to the changes I've already described, we also grew in size. Our commission was 11 members. The legislature expanded it to 13 members, adding an academic and somebody who's employed by a provider of rehabilitation services or treatment services to people who have been released from prison. Um, so so that was kind of good timing, because that was our new commission. Basically, was the new members, most of whom had been appointed by the governor fairly recently. But I'm interrupting myself. Let me go back to what we were talking about with the budget request. So the third largest item was for academic research support that was probably underfunded. Thankfully, our bacon was saved by a method that we'll talk about in a little bit, and Leo will probably talk about that. But yeah, we probably wouldn't have had enough money to actually do what needed to be done on the academic research side, but for a grant that came in to save the day. And then the second largest request that we made in the budget request in 2022 to the 2023 legislature was to temporarily add another research analyst. So we temporarily went up to 8 members of our team from 6 being the norm. And that person was really essential. That the sole purpose of that position was to work on the comprehensive review. I'm sure like your agency, the research staff is pretty well occupied with sort of the rhythm of the year, and how they analyze data, and how they, I guess I shouldn't make assumptions, but our agency is pretty well occupied throughout the year at different things that take up their time at different times, particularly during the legislative session. So it was really helpful to have that extra person. So that was the budget request that we made at the end of 2022. We sent that to the governor's office. The governor signed off on it, no changes, and approved the permanent position. But really, it was a good year to make temporary changes. At all times, I called this a phase 1. So this was intended to communicate to the governor, to the legislature, that this was only the beginning of the comprehensive review, that we weren't going to be able to comprehensively review the sentencing guidelines in one biennium, but that we would be able to, in one biennium, at least figure out what we needed to do to finish the job, and then I could come back with an additional funding request. As it turns out, that's not what happened, but we'll get to that in a minute. But that was the intent, to just make this phase 1 of at least 2-phase comprehensive review. The legislature was very favorably inclined to hear our proposal. There were a lot of evidence-based questions that I raised in the proposal. Some of these questions that we knew were out there, but we didn't really know the answer to. How can the guidelines maximize public safety? Why are criminal history scores increasing? Why are presumptive sentences increasing? These were mysterious trends that we didn't really know the answer to, and now we do. Why are departure rates so high for many offenses? Do severity levels reflect culpability and harm accurately? Is the role of criminal history and punishment balanced? How can racial disparities be ameliorated? Are the right tools available to address serious and violent crime? How can we most efficiently use correctional resources? And how can the guidelines be simplified? So uh, we received the money. The commission was rejiggered to add the additional people. At about that same time, my chair took a job in the Department of Corrections, so she became the Commissioner of Corrections designee, being an assistant Commissioner of Corrections. And so we added another new person to the commission. So essentially, we had a pretty new commission. Our commission, I said it was 13 members. 10 of those members are directly or indirectly appointed by the governor, and 3 of those members are judges in the 3 different levels of our judicial system. So at some point, my chair, I think, I don't necessarily know what I'm saying. I don't know if the following is accurate, so maybe I shouldn't say it publicly, but somebody talked to some folks at the University of Minnesota, which is where my chair used to work, and talked to them into talked a group to an elite team of academic researchers at the University of Minnesota into applying for a grant from Arnold Ventures to assist the commission as it tried to make evidence-based changes as appropriate to the Minnesota sentencing guidelines through this comprehensive review. And that team independently, but with the support of the commission, made that request to Arnold Ventures, and Arnold Ventures generously funded their research. So we were augmented in ways far beyond the pittance that I had requested in terms of academic support, academic research support. And meanwhile, the MAD went out and did a lot of stakeholder engagement. So, Leah, I don't know if this would be a good time to just chat about what the academic research team from the University of Minnesota brought to the table.
Yeah, sure. So, just a little background. As Nate said, I came on board with the Sentencing Guidelines Commission here in Minnesota in the fall of September of 2023. So right as our comprehensive review was starting, and it was an exciting time. And as Nate said, we were really lucky to be able to work with this elite group of researchers from the University of Minnesota. We have a senior researcher. We have the chair in criminal procedure law. We have a sociologist, and we also have an economist. And so we have those 4 individuals who have been working together. We all meet together, so we really support. It's really a team effort along with my staff and the University of Minnesota. We do a lot of collaborative work and talk through what we need. And as Nate said, some of the questions we started out that the U of M dug into was why are the presumptive prison rates increasing and looking at criminal history. So they were able to dig into that. They were also able to do qualitative interviews with practitioners throughout the state to dig into departure rates. We have some very high departure rates in general, and we targeted certain offenses that had particularly high rates, and had one of the researchers from the University of Minnesota talk to prosecutors and defense attorneys about why they're making departures and kind of the practical pieces behind that, which was really important. We are leveraging our sociologists and economists to really, we're still working with them to dig deeper into things like criminal history, but also looking at kind of down the line outcomes and looking at the length of sentences in prison, and do lengths matter with outcomes later on with recidivism. Our economist is trying to link us with some data related to employment and education. We're not there yet, but it's an exciting potential to really, again, look at longer term, being able to follow some of these individuals who have been sentenced to prison and kind of looking at their outcomes long term. So those are some of we have a lot going on and it's an iterative process as we bring information and data back to the commission. New questions come up, refinements come up, and we've been really fortunate to be flexible and have a lot of resources to kind of dig into those questions and bring back the information that our commission wants. So that's a little bit about, I don't know, Nate, if you had something else you wanted me to focus on.
No, thanks for that. So,
We have a question, Director
please.
Schultz.
Nate, I just had a question come in, just to back the truck up just a little bit.
Sure.
What was the reason for the need for the overhaul? All of those questions that you mentioned, or what was the driving force? Was there a multitude of things, or just one thing?
I mean, I guess from where I sit, the main reason was just it's just good governance to iteratively look at your policies. I mean, that's really how it ought to be done. I think that's you think of the Green Book and federal agency standards. That's how it should be done. Policies should be iteratively reviewed to see if they still make sense. And while we had done some iterative review, it hadn't really ever been comprehensively reviewed, altogether, like I said. So it's just not a good idea to leave a policy going that long. But yeah, and secondly, there were these questions that were coming up that, are the guidelines really meeting the needs of the customers? We've got some pretty high departure rates. We seem to have, presumptive sentences rising on autopilot, which was really mysterious to me.
So you weren't under the crush of bed space capacity or anything like that?
No, we're COVID kind of solved that problem for us. So we were a little bit above bed space before COVID. And we don't have, I think, as formal a mandate as you to keep the capacity down below, or to keep the population down below capacity. We have just a general, we are required to, bear in mind the limited bed space of the state of Minnesota. It's and not to skip too far ahead of ourselves, but it is possible. We're closing an old prison that has, it's actually a little dangerous. I shouldn't say a little dangerous. It's people have been, guards have been injured by inmates at this place. It's not really designed with safety in mind. It was built a long time ago, and so they're closing it. And that loss of capacity, there's no plan to make it up. And it's possible that the policies that the commission is looking at this fall haven't been voted on yet, but the policies that they seem to be leaning toward this fall could make up that gap. But yeah, no, it really was, honestly, it's a little bit of a plug for NASC, again, not on the board anymore, but it's really helpful to have, people like you and me, Scott, and even our counterparts on commissions having a chance annually to rub shoulders and talk to each other and exchange ideas in a formal or informal process. And it really was just the fact that Kelly and I were sitting, the chair and I were sitting in that meeting in NASC in 2022, and thought that's a good idea. We should do that too. So unfolding the story then, so we met, we got a lot of stakeholder input, a lot of good discussion on the purposes and principles of the guidelines and where we should go. And and what we should do next. A lot of planning and thinking um, that went on in the rest of 23 and 24. And then at the end of 24, it became evident, again, an even number. So we're coming up on the legislative session that will set the budget for the next biennium. It became evident that it was not going to be a year of plenty, that we were looking at 2025 being a year of famine. And so we probably weren't going to get anything, bluntly, for anything extra for the comprehensive review. So at this point, this is where Chair Mitchell stood up and last December came up with a plan to basically get us across the finish line quickly. And I shouldn't say the finish line. Let's call it a finish line. So to get us where we have something to show for our work in the comprehensive review, and we have a lot of information that we can work with going forward in the years to come with our own resources without any additional investment from the state, other than just maintaining the agency. So, and in fact, we are now past the end of the biennium, so we are working under, for the most part, existing resources. So other than the fact that the academic researchers still continue to be funded through the end of the year by the Arnold Grant. Actually, Leah, I don't know if do you want to talk specifically about Matt and how useful that was to have a dedicated researcher who's working both with the commission and with the University of Minnesota research team. Really, I mean, that was his primary job.
Yeah, I mean, I think without his position, we would have really struggled to be able to get the work done. Again, having a researcher who is just able to focus on the conference review, because as Nate said, the rest of our research staff, we kind of do our normal yearly tasks. And so to have someone who then also does a lot of crossover with the U of M professors. We've also been lucky that the U of M professors have had research students that they've been able to tap into as well. And so our researcher was able to connect with them. And it's just really it's been a tremendous effort and really productive. But to have that sole focus on this work has been critical to really move us forward.
So also at the end of 2024, the chair had, I mean, we had gotten some of the results back from MAD's stakeholder engagement, and there were not everybody was saying the same thing, but there were certainly some repeated themes from different stakeholder groups, and which was they made sure to balance it geographically and racially and by different professions and stakeholders and that sort of thing. And you heard some common themes, like the guidelines are a little complicated, hard to follow, which I guess makes sense if you've got a document that I mean, there was a clarifying rewrite, but it wasn't anything by way of reorganization in about 10 years ago. So, I think it really could use an entire reorganization, and that's something we're looking at doing next year. But as far as this year goes, so let me I'm starting to tell you about Chair Mitchell's plan. Basically, in order to really accelerate things in calendar year 2025 and get things done, she kind of broke up Oh, I should tell you one other thing about our commission that's different from yours. So we don't. We are a legislative override state, is how I've heard it called. So if the commission has an initiative to change the sentencing guidelines, it has to submit that initiative to the legislature at the beginning of the annual legislative session by January 15th. And then the legislature has the entire session to either do nothing, in which case it will go into effect on August 1st, or or sometimes they pass a law affirming it, or taking a different position. We had a child pornography study that we completed a few years ago, and there was a minority report, and the legislature preferred the minority report to the commission's report. So they passed a law adopting the minority report rather than the commission's report. But unless the legislature does adopt a law to the contrary, the guidelines proposals that were submitted to the legislature in January will go into effect on August 1st. So that's my understanding is Kansas is a legislative adoption state where the legislature actually has to adopt the proposals of the commission. I should note, and maybe it's integral to a legislative adoption state that you have legislators on the commission. I should note that there are no legislators on the commission in Minnesota. So the chair's target then was January 15th of 2026, and to see what basically consensus changes could be adopted by that time. And in doing this, she basically, the way I conceive of it is the year 2025 was divided into halves. The first half was also divided into halves. So there was a steering committee that, and this was really a cue that we took from this is a book by Dale Parent, the first executive director of the Sentencing Guidelines Commission, called Structuring Criminal Sentences, and they ran into trouble. Again, they had very limited time to make these basically create these sentencing guidelines out of whole cloth in 1979, chiefly in 1979, some in 1978, but it seemed like a lot of ice was broken when they broke up into a subcommittee comprised of not to be biased here, being legally trained, but basically it was comprised of lawyers for the most part, the prosecutor, the defense attorney, a judge, maybe more than one judge. And in our case, we also had the probation officer on the steering committee, who really is probably most expert at how the guidelines work in practice when the rubber meets the road. So these were people who really knew the guidelines, didn't have to waste a lot of time trying to understand the sentencing guidelines. And they met as a steering committee during the first half of the year prior to the commission meeting. And then the commission meeting would meet also during the second half of the year. So what the commission was working on for the most part this year was ranking offenses. The whole commission, and we looked at different offense groups that had come up repeatedly during our conversations during the first part of the comprehensive review prior to 2025. And we analyzed those offenses. We looked at them. I would describe it as vertically for the most part. So, for example, we had an offense group that involved any kind of driving, criminal driving conduct, felony driving conduct. So you'd have criminal vehicular homicide, criminal vehicular operation resulting in great bodily harm, substantial bodily harm, fleeing a peace officer in a motor vehicle, whether or not that resulted in substantial bodily harm is a felony, and DWI. So that would be one offense group that the commission looked at, and then determined based on the harm caused and the offender's culpability whether or not it was correctly ranked. And they came up with some recommendations to make some ranking changes over the course of basically the whole first half of the year. That's really what they were focused on, was ranking those offense groups. Meanwhile, the steering committee was looking more at policies in general and how the sentencing guidelines were structured, and what really their focus ended up being more on the criminal history score and whether or not there were some changes that should be made to the criminal history score. And the chair made sure that there were diverse voices represented in the steering committee and expert voices represented in the steering committee. And I was quite surprised at how successful the steering committee was in coming up with a package of meaningful changes to sentencing policy. And it is premature to to do a victory lap because the commission hasn't even taken a vote on this package yet. But we've had so far 2 meetings on this package of policy changes, and the sense in the room is that there's consensus on these changes, and taken as a package. Generally, the ranking changes tend to be increase penalties, and the other policy changes tend to decrease penalties. So there's some there's and there's probably more of a decrease effect. That's what we're finding, is that there's more of a decrease effect, such that even when you account for the increased tendencies of the ranking changes, we're probably going to be looking at enough of a bed savings to take care of the previously mentioned Stillwater prison closing. So that's how the first half of the year went. And then in August we met. Well, in June and July we kind of have to respond to the legislative session. That's another feature of our guidelines. I don't know how yours, or how our commission's authority, I should say. I don't know how yours works, Scott, but if there's a legislative change during the legislative session, the commission can quickly react to that legislative change without advance submittal to the legislature. So the commission, for example, if the legislature creates a new crime, a couple of years ago, the legislature created the crime of carjacking, which was basically aggravated robbery, but with a car. And the staff recommended that it be ranked the same. The commission actually thought it was appropriate to rank it more severely, so they ranked it more severely than aggravated robbery. But that decision did not have to go to the legislature. That was something that just took effect the same date that the crime took effect. So we did that in June and July. Then in August we had a meeting where we unveiled to the commission as a whole what the steering committee's proposals were, and they seem to be favorably received. And this is one of those meetings where we had the MAD facilitator facilitate the meeting, which was definitely well worth it. And it seems like there's a consensus policy package. So we met again in September to see if we could refine the policy package. And really, there weren't a lot of changes. We made some changes to the purpose and principles section. In October, potentially there could be a vote on it, or maybe it'll wait till November, and then it has to go to a public hearing and then a final decision before it's submitted to the legislature in January. So that was the accelerated timetable that the chair had in mind, and it seems to be quite successful. And then next year, as I indicated previously, we're going to be continuing to look at some of those things that either aren't low-hanging fruit because they weren't quite as clear that there was consensus, or they're not low-hanging fruit because they're more difficult or time-consuming. For example, the restructuring the sentencing guidelines. So I have kind of an idea of how to do that. And one of the things that I had envisioned for a future phase was having a professional like legal writer come in and work on rewriting the guidelines. It doesn't look like that's in the cards, but I think we can at least have like a professional rule writer review the work that we've done to make sure we didn't mess anything up. So that's kind of where we're at in a nutshell. So any questions, we'd be happy to take them.
Judge Donovan has a question.
Are Minnesota guidelines mandatory?
They are mandatory enough that Blakely applies, but they're not mandatory. So what is mandatory is that the judge has to articulate substantial and compelling reasons for deviating from the sentencing guidelines, and those are subject to appeal. It's unusual that that the sentence is overturned on appeal. But if the judge, mails it in, doesn't, I mean, I think of a case a few years ago where the judge basically, not to be disrespectful, was sort of like, well, I don't know if you're a good, this was a case where the guidelines presumed prison, and the judge said, I don't know if you're a good candidate for sex offender treatment or not, but I'm going to take a chance on you. Here you go. I'm putting you on probation. And the Supreme Court found that was not a substantial and compelling reason, that there was no that there really had to be a finding of particular amenability to probation in that particular case based on the facts before the judge, and they did not. But yeah, we are subject to Blakely. So and I would say our as a result of that, since Blakely is passed, our aggravated departures have gone down to nothing. I mean, not literally, but and I don't really understand why, because it's still possible to do. You just have to. It does require thinking ahead, because the rules of criminal procedure now require, pretty advanced notice that the prosecutor's seeking an aggravated departure from the sentencing guidelines, and maybe prosecutors just aren't thinking about it that early in the process. But for whatever reason, the aggravated departure in Minnesota is almost extinct.
Thank you.
Director Schultz?
All right, Nate, let's get down to brass tacks.
Yes,
What
sir.
kind of money did you spend?
What kind of money did we spend? Well, brass tacks. It was not counting Leah, it was 243,000 in FY24 and 147,000 in FY25. And for those who might be really paying attention and wondering, and I'll just break that down for you, Scott, since you're asking, and I've got it up here. So the MAD consulting fees were 180,000. We didn't spend that whole amount, but that's how much we requested and received. The academic consulting fees, and I think I was thinking of a quarter of a professor, like maybe a recent PhD. I talked to Reese Hester about how much this would be, and this is kind of what I came up with. I think this number was too small, but I did 25,000 for academic consulting fees. And again, I really think we were saved there by Kelly or whoever the mysterious force was that talked to people at the University of Minnesota and got them to put in for a Arnold Ventures grant. So Arnold really came through there. And then the balance was, I've got it broken down here, but the balance was for the salary of the research analyst. I will say that we had kind of a little bit of a legislative miracle at the end of the session. The legislature put in a provision that said that any unspent funds at the end of the biennium, which would normally return to the Treasury, the agency could continue to spend those funds for the appropriated purpose for the next biennium. So if you were listening very, very carefully, you heard me say that in our August meeting, which was after this biennium spend was done, we had MAD facilitate the meeting. And that's because we were able to take some of those unspent funds from the previous biennium and use them. And I don't know why the legislature did that, but I can tell you that it's I see it. If it does not seem to be contributing to waste, fraud, or abuse. To the contrary, it seems to be contributing to us actually spending the money with for the purposes for which the money was intended to be spent, instead of buying boxes of paper clips, which has happened in the past.
So do you anticipate spending more money to continue? And what questions have you answered that you talked about before? Have you been able to answer any of those questions today?
Well, I'll let Leah answer that second question if you want to. But to the first question, I anticipate that the one big expense that I still see us needing to spend for the comprehensive review. Well, there's two expenses that I see us needing to spend on the comprehensive review. One is coming up, and that is probably as soon as the commission takes a final vote. All right, let me back up. So we are not under Department of Corrections, but we are the business process owners of an application called Electronic Worksheet System. Nobody really knows how that runs except us. And the programmers of that system work for the Department of Corrections, because that application is housed on the Department of Corrections web portal, which all probation officers have access to. So they already have access to that. So it's pretty slick because they already have the credentials and log on, verification that they need to access electronic worksheet systems. And they're the ones who create the sentencing worksheets that the judges have in front of them when they pass down a sentence, so they know whether or not they need to articulate substantial and compelling reasons to depart. Sometimes we have departures that the judge, didn't know there was a departure because the judge didn't have a worksheet. With these policy changes, there are implied some programming changes for the electronic worksheet system. So some of the money that the legislature wisely allowed us to spend in this biennium is going to go toward reprogramming the electronic worksheet system in response to the proposals. And we're really going to have to get on that as soon as the commission finalizes the proposals in December or January, because if we wait to find out the final answer, which will happen when the legislature gavels out in May, there just won't be enough time before the August 1st effective date to do all that programming. So we're going to have to take a little bit of gamble and do some of the pre-programming of that in advance. The other expenditure that I expect to make is it looks like I'm probably, with the assistance of a subcommittee, I'm going to rework the sentencing guideline structure. One really helpful suggestion that we got from the stakeholders was, why doesn't it look more like a statute? We all know how to read a statute, and then we got this thing, and it kind of looks like its own thing. And it's really, it's a hierarchical, 1A, 2, and it goes down the list, and you get lost. You're not really sure where you are. Is this 1 or 2, or what is this 2A or 2B? And so this will be really helpful to just reorganize it. But I do want to run it past a rule writer. So we're going to anticipate to hire a contract rule writer, which might be an underemployed rule writer from another agency, which would be pretty slick, because that's much easier to do. You don't have to do a contract for that, or put it out for bid and so forth. But we'd hire a rule writer to make sure that's we're not, it's all about the unintended consequences when you rewrite something. So we're trying to avoid that. So Kelly, you want to talk about the research side?
You mean Leah?
Leah? Sorry, yeah.
You just call me
There
Kelly.
we go.
That's okay. I've been upgraded to the chair.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we have been able to answer, or at least partially answer, 3 of the questions that we set out to answer. So what we have been able to answer is, why are criminal history scores increasing? We've been able to partly answer why are presumptive sentences increasing, and why are departure rates so high for so many offenses. So that's our progress to date.
Is that?
Can you tell us what that is?
You'll have
curious.
to invite us back for another presentation.
We got 6 minutes. We can. Well, one of the things we learned, and actually I heard this at NASC from Dr. Julia Laskronsky, who's one of the members of the academic research team. is that the really two of those questions are related. And so we've seen a rise in criminal history score, which has therefore increased the presumptive sentences, the presumptive commits, which was, probably a predictable result. We saw both of those things going up at the same time. It makes sense that they would be correlated to each other because the criminal history score is definitely something that influences whether or not somebody has a presumptive commit. And it turns out that the reason for the increase in the criminal history score is because there's been an increase in the average age of the defendants in Minnesota. So essentially you've got more of a look back period, more of a, older people have more history, I guess is one way to put it, right? By definition. And because they have more history, they have more criminal history. And one of the really interesting things that the commission's considering, again, there have been no votes, but they're really, if there's opposition to us, they're definitely hiding, because so far everybody's been nodding at all the proposals that have been coming up and responding affirmatively. But one of the proposals is to reduce the decay period, or the look back period, from 15 years to 10 years. And that's really has a significant driver in the reduced prison beds. And we would say that makes sense if the age of the prisoners are going up, or the age of the people being sentenced is going up. It would make sense if you curtailed that look back period. Then it's going to reduce. Let's say somebody's being sentenced in his mid-30s, and you're only looking back to the mid-20s, then that could be a significant chunk of criminal history that's no longer relevant to that person. So the research is definitely directly affecting the policies.
Ms. Collison, question?
Yes, I think it'd be very helpful to have the full list of his questions that they asked themselves. You went through it very completely, but rather quickly, sir. And I'd love to get a list.
Do I have the ability to chat here? Let's see.
Okay, you should be able to, if you've got it, to drop it in the chat.
Okay, there it is.
Yeah, you can also visit our website. We have the questions laid out. We do have a comprehensive review section. So you can take a look there.
And that was not intended to be an exhaustive list. That was just sort of the questions that, had been coming up that staff was aware of at the time I was making the request to the governor in the fall of 2022.
Any other questions? Thank you very much for your presentation. Very helpful for what we're going to dive into here in a few minutes.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Have a good afternoon.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Members of the commission, we'll take our afternoon break, 2:30 to 2:45, and start back up sharp at 2:45.